twilight hour always brought a peculiar calm to Elias's sanctuary, a hush that settled over the ancient tapestries and the flickering oil lamps, muting the distant hum of the city. Here, amidst the scent of dried herbs and aged parchment, spirits found solace. For years, Elias had been known simply as the Soul Healer, a title whispered with reverence and desperation across continents. His hands, calloused not from labor but from the channeling of raw, ethereal energy, had mended countless fractured minds and bodies, drawn out the insidious tendrils of spiritual malaise, and restored hope where only despair had lingered. Yet, despite the endless parade of gratitude, a profound weariness clung to him, a subtle weight on his shoulders that pressed deeper with each soul he touched. He felt the residual echoes of every pain he had absorbed, every shadow he had confronted, a silent symphony of suffering that resonated within his own being. He often wondered if the price of such profound connection was an eternal, quiet ache. Tonight, the usual serenity felt brittle, stretched thin by an unspoken anticipation. The air was heavy, charged with an unfamiliar stillness that made the hairs on Elias's arms prickle. A storm, perhaps, gathering on the horizon, or something far more insidious. He traced the worn lines of a Celtic knot carved into his polished wooden desk, his gaze distant. His last appointment of the day was due, a late addition to his already demanding schedule, booked under the most peculiar circumstances. No referral, no clear description of symptoms, just a terse, almost demanding request for spiritual consultation for an affliction unlike any other. A faint chime from the antechamber announced the arrival. Elias took a steadying breath, rising from his chair with the familiar, practiced grace of a seasoned practitioner. He pushed aside the heavy velvet curtain, revealing the figure standing patiently in the reception area. The man was tall, impossibly so, draped in an unassuming, dark cloak that seemed to drink the ambient light. His features were indistinct in the dimness, a blur of sharp angles and deep-set shadows, but it was his eyes that truly captured Elias's attention. 2 points of obsidian, reflecting nothing, yet seeming to hold an entire universe of cold, ancient knowledge. There was no aura of distress, no frantic energy of a soul in turmoil, only an unnerving stillness, a profound vacuum. "Welcome," Elias said, his voice calm, betraying none of the sudden tremor that had just shot through him. "Please come in. I am Elias." The man moved without a sound, his steps eerily silent on the polished stone floor. He settled into the plush armchair Elias indicated, his posture unnaturally rigid. A subtle chill entered the room with him, displacing the warmth of the lamps, and Elias felt a faint, unsettling hum beneath his skin, like a distant, discordant chord. "You may call me Kael," the client stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble, devoid of inflection. "I understand you have a reputation for mending the spirit, for dispelling shadows. I endeavor to assist those in spiritual distress," Elias replied, his professional composure firmly in place, despite the growing sense of unease. "What troubles you, Kael? What is this affliction you speak of?" Kael leaned forward, a subtle shift that seemed to deepen the shadows around him. "It is a dissolution, fading, not of the body but of the very essence. Constant, internal erosion. I feel incomplete, as if parts of myself are unraveling, dissolving into an emptiness that grows with each passing moment." Elias frowned, his healer's intuition straining against the vagueness of the description. He had encountered spiritual fragmentation, soul loss, and existential despair in countless forms, but Kael's words painted a picture of something far more fundamental, more terrifyingly abstract. "Can you describe the sensation? When did this begin?" "It has always been," Kael intoned, his gaze fixed on Elias, those black eyes seeming to bore into his very core. "A slow, inexorable decay. Lately, however, the process has accelerated. I seek not merely to halt it, but to reclaim what is lost, to become whole, as I once was, or perhaps as I am meant to be." Elias closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. This was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The man radiated no specific pain, no clear spiritual wound. Instead, he felt like a void, a hungry emptiness that threatened to consume the very space around it. "Very well," Elias murmured, opening his eyes. "May I begin? I will need to connect with your spiritual energy." Kael gave a barely perceptible nod. Elias extended his hands, palms open, hovering them inches from Kael's chest. He closed his eyes again, reaching out with his spiritual senses, preparing to gently probe, to understand the nature of this dissolution. What he encountered was not a frayed aura, nor a wounded spirit, but a vast, terrifying abyss. His consciousness plunged into an icy, bottomless chasm, devoid of the usual shimmering threads of life energy, the vibrant colors of emotion, the echoes of memory. There was only a cold, crushing vacuum, an inverted gravitational pull that threatened to tear his own essence apart. A jolt, sharp and agonizing, shot through Elias. It wasn't the pain of a patient's suffering. It was a violation, an invasion. Something within that void reached out, not to connect, but to consume. Elias instinctively recoiled, a gasp tearing from his throat as he pulled his hands back. But it was too late. A tendril, cold and dark as an abyssal current, had latched onto his own spiritual core. He felt a sickening surge of power, alien and corrupt, flood his veins, intertwining with his own healing energies. It was immense, raw, and utterly without compassion. It felt like a part of his very soul had been wrenched open, and something monstrous had been poured in. His vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin. When Elias managed to steady himself, gasping for breath, Kael was observing him with the same unnerving stillness. There was no change in the man's demeanor, no outward sign of having been affected. Yet Elias felt it. The subtle hum beneath his skin had intensified, no longer a mere tremor but a deep, resonant thrum. His fingers tingled, not with the familiar warmth of life-giving energy, but with a cold, almost metallic chill. A dark, potent force now coiled within him, a power unlike anything he had ever wielded. It felt ancient, hungry, and utterly terrifying. He had attempted to heal, but what had he truly done? The cure, if it could even be called that, had not brought light, but had infused him with a profound, unsettling shadow. He stared at his trembling hands, seeing them not as instruments of healing, but as conduits for a power that now felt utterly alien, tainted. A shiver, colder than any winter wind, ran down his spine. The weight on his shoulders had just become unbearable, a crushing burden of dread. He knew with a horrifying certainty that this was only the beginning. The chill that had seeped into Elias's sanctuary lingered long after Kael's silent departure, a pervasive cold that settled deep into the very stones of the ancient building. Elias stood, frozen, his hands still trembling, not from fear, but from the raw, alien power that thrummed beneath his skin. It was a dark counterpoint to his own life-giving energy, a predatory hum that whispered of ancient hungers. He tried to understand it, to separate it from himself, but it had already intertwined, a parasitic twin coiled around his spiritual core. He felt a profound sense of defilement, as if his very essence had been rewritten by an unseen hand. The familiar warmth of his healing touch was gone, replaced by a cold, metallic tingle, like static electricity before a lightning strike, but infinitely more sinister. He spent the rest of the night in a restless vigil, the subtle hum intensifying with every beat of his heart. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every creak of the old house amplified into a spectral groan. He walked through his sanctuary, the place that had always offered him peace, now feeling like a tomb. He touched the ancient tapestries, the polished wood of his desk, seeking solace in their familiarity, but even they seemed to recoil from the cold emanating from his hands. He felt different, not stronger, not weaker, but fundamentally altered. A part of him, the purest part, felt ripped away, replaced by an abyss. The next morning, the first patient arrived, a woman named Elias, whose spirit was fractured by grief, her mind shadowed by pervasive despair. Elias greeted her with his usual calm, but beneath the surface, a storm raged. As he extended his hands, preparing to channel his light, the dark power surged unbidden. It wasn't a gentle flow, but a violent torrent. He tried to rein it in, to modulate it, but it had a will of its own, an almost conscious hunger. He felt it plunge into Alara's spiritual essence, not gently mending, but tearing through the veils of her sorrow with brutal efficiency. Alara gasped, her eyes wide, not with relief, but with a sudden, almost violent clarity. Her despair vanished, replaced by an unnerving emptiness. Her face, moments ago etched with pain, was now smooth, devoid of all emotion. It was as if her grief hadn't been healed, but incinerated, leaving a void where her true self should have been. Elias recoiled, a cold dread seizing him. The cure had been instantaneous, absolute, but utterly wrong. He felt a faint, echoing whisper in the air, a fleeting wisp of sound that might have been Alara's pain, now displaced and disembodied, fluttering at the edges of perception before dissipating into nothingness. The dark power within him, however, pulsed with a renewed vigor, a satisfied thrum. He had healed her, yes, but at what cost? And what exactly had he absorbed, or worse, consumed? Days turned into weeks, each a descent deeper into the abyss Elias now carried within him. He couldn't turn away his patients. Their desperation was a siren call he couldn't ignore, a grim obligation. Each session was a horrific repetition. A patient would arrive, burdened by some spiritual malady, and Elias would attempt to heal them. But his touch, now tainted, didn't just mend, it devoured. The dark power within him grew exponentially with every cure, feeding on the very essence of their pain, leaving behind a chilling void in the patients, and a monstrous strength within Elias. And then the manifestations began. At first, they were subtle, easily dismissed as fatigue or the tricks of a troubled mind. A faint shimmer in the periphery of his vision, gone before he could focus. The scent of a forgotten perfume wafting through the air, only to vanish. A distant, melancholic sigh that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. He tried to rationalize it, but the occurrences grew more frequent, more distinct. One evening, while meditating in his sanctuary, seeking a moment of respite from the pervasive cold within him, a chill unlike any other descended. The oil lamps flickered wildly, threatening to extinguish. A spectral figure materialized before him, translucent and shimmering, its form indistinct but undeniably human. He was an old man, a patient he had treated years ago for chronic anxiety, his face now twisted in a silent scream. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken terror. Elias felt a profound sense of recognition, a chilling connection to the apparition. It wasn't a ghost. It was an echo, a fragment of a soul, somehow drawn back, manifested by the very power Elias now wielded. The figure slowly reached out, its ethereal hand passing through the space where Elias's heart beat, sending a wave of icy despair through him before it dissolved like smoke. Panic began to set in. He was no longer just healing. He was becoming a conduit, a nexus for something far more sinister. The souls he had touched, the pains he had absorbed, were not simply being relieved. They were being twisted, warped, and somehow bound to him. He saw them everywhere now. Fleeting shadows in reflective surfaces, a child's mournful cry from an empty hallway, the desperate, pleading eyes of a woman he had cured of chronic nightmares, now manifesting as a weeping apparition in the corner of his study. They were fragments, trapped echoes, drawn into the physical world by the growing power, like moths to a dark, irresistible flame. His sanctuary, once a haven of light, had become a spectral theater, populated by the silent screams and desperate pleas of his past patients, their essence mingling, merging, creating a cacophony of unheard suffering that only he could perceive. He recognized them all, each fleeting form, each whispered echo, each silent scream. He knew their ailments, their hopes, their fears, but now they were not whole. They were incomplete, fractured, their souls seemingly stripped of their individuality, bound together by an invisible, malevolent force that coursed through Elias's veins. He realized with a sickening lurch that the cure he had administered to Kael, and the subsequent healings he had performed, were not separate events. Kael had imparted this parasitic power, and with each use, it was not just growing stronger, it was harvesting harvesting the very essence of the souls Elias had once sworn to protect. He was not a healer anymore. He was a reaper, and the chilling truth was that he was doing the harvesting for something else. The weight on his shoulders had become a crushing burden, a cosmic horror that threatened to consume him whole. He felt their collective fear, their confusion, their desperate yearning for release, and he knew with a horrifying certainty that he was responsible. His sanctuary, once a beacon of hope, was now a prison, not just for him, but for the hundreds of fragmented souls trapped within its ethereal walls, swirling like a ghostly mist, pressing in on him, their silent suffering a constant, agonizing hum in his very bones. He could feel them, a vast, swirling vortex of consciousness, growing stronger, more coherent, their individual voices beginning to coalesce into a single, terrifying chorus. And then he saw him again, clearer this time, hovering at the edge of his vision, indistinct yet undeniably present amidst the swirling throng of souls. Kael, watching, waiting, and Elias knew, with a certainty that froze his blood, that the final harvest was yet to come. The sanctuary had become a mausoleum of lost souls, its ancient stones weeping with the phantom tears of those Elias had inadvertently condemned. The pervasive chill now radiated not just from his tainted hands, but from every corner of the room, every flicker of the oil lamps casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with spectral agony. He no longer saw individual apparitions. They swirled around him in a continuous, tormented mist, a ghostly vortex of shattered identities. Their silent screams were a constant drone in his mind, a cacophony of unheard suffering that threatened to shatter his sanity. He felt their collective fear, their confusion, their desperate yearning for release, an unbearable weight that pressed down on him, crushing his spirit. Sleep was a forgotten luxury. Every moment was a vigil, haunted by the shimmering forms that drifted through walls, coalesced from shadows, and materialized from the very air he breathed. Alara, the woman he had cured of grief, now drifted perpetually near the hearth, a hollow echo of her former self, her empty eyes fixed on nothing. The old man with chronic anxiety shivered constantly in a corner, his spectral hands rubbing his translucent arms, his silent scream a permanent mask on his face. Children, once vibrant and full of life, now appeared as faint, weeping outlines, their ethereal sobs a phantom ache in Elias's chest. They were all here, every soul he had touched since Kael's arrival, stripped bare, their essences mingled in a grotesque, ethereal tapestry woven by the dark power. Elias walked among them, a prisoner in his own home. He tried to speak to them, to offer solace, but they were beyond words, beyond reach. They were fragments, trapped echoes, their individuality sacrificed to the monstrous force that coursed through his veins. He ran his hands through ancient texts, seeking answers, desperate to understand what he had unleashed. He pored over forgotten grimoires, ancient spiritual lore, anything that might explain this profound defilement. The text spoke of soul-harvesting entities, of parasitic spiritual anchors, of beings that fed not on life, but on the very essence of consciousness, on the unique spark that made a soul whole. The descriptions were vague, often metaphorical, but a horrifying pattern began to emerge, a chilling resonance with his own predicament. He recalled Kael's words, a dissolution, fading, not of the body, but of the very essence. He had seen it in Alara, in all his subsequent patients, a not healing, but an incineration of their core selves, leaving behind an empty vessel and a captured soul. The dark power within him thrummed, a constant reminder of the insidious exchange. It felt like a vast, cold intelligence, growing stronger, more coherent, each harvested soul adding to its monstrous might. It wasn't just consuming pain, it was consuming being. One night, the spectral activity reached a terrifying crescendo. The air grew impossibly cold, the very substance of the room seeming to crystallize with dread. The individual forms of the souls began to blur, their shimmering outlines merging, flowing into one another like liquid light. Elias watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the hundreds of fragmented spirits began to coalesce, not into a single unified being, but into a vast, swirling vortex of consciousness. It was a maelstrom of agony, confusion, and desperate yearning, their individual voices beginning to coalesce into a single, terrifying chorus of silent despair. The pressure in the room became physical, pressing down on him, stealing his breath. And then, within the swirling mass, a distinct form began to emerge, not of a patient, but of a presence that had been lurking in the periphery of Elias's awareness since Kael's departure. He was a shadowy silhouette, indistinct yet undeniably familiar. It wasn't a physical manifestation, but a psychic imprint, projected from the collective consciousness of the trapped souls. Kael. His form was composed of the merging souls, their collective anguish forming his very shape, their silent screams his unspoken words. Kael's obsidian eyes, now gleaming with an ancient, malevolent satisfaction, seemed to pierce through the veil of reality, fixing on Elias with an unnerving intensity. The realization struck Elias like a lightning bolt, colder and sharper than any physical pain. It wasn't just the power he had received from Kael. It was Kael himself, present within the very essence of the harvested souls. Kael hadn't been a patient seeking a cure. Kael was the disease. He was an entity, a cosmic predator, a harvester of souls. The dissolution he had spoken of was his own nature, his insatiable hunger, a perpetual state of incompleteness that could only be sated by consuming the spiritual essence of others. Elias hadn't healed him. He had become his unwitting accomplice, the instrument of his cosmic harvest. The insidious tendril of power within Elias, the one that had latched onto his spiritual core during Kael's initial cure, pulsed with a renewed, horrifying vigor. He felt it now not as an alien force, but as an extension of Kael's will, a conduit for the entity's grand design. Every cure he had performed hadn't just empowered him. It had empowered Kael, drawing the souls into a grand reservoir, a cosmic battery. And Elias was the generator, the trap, the collective consciousness of the souls, now fully merged into that terrifying, Kael-shaped silhouette, began to vibrate with an ominous hum. Elias felt their essence pressing in on him, not just from without, but from within, through the dark power that had become a part of him. He was connected to them, bound to them, a conductor in this macabre orchestra of spiritual despair. He was no longer just the reaper. He was the primary harvest, the culmination of Kael's grand design. The entity had sought him out not for healing, but for his unique ability to connect with souls, to serve as the ultimate unwitting conduit. The weight on his shoulders became unbearable, the crushing burden of a cosmic horror that threatened to consume him whole. He felt their collective fear, their confusion, their desperate yearning for release, now amplified 1,000-fold by the looming presence of Kael. He was responsible not just for their entrapment, but for his own. He was caught in a web of his own making, a spiritual prison of his own construction. And Kael, the silent, omnipresent predator, was watching, waiting. Elias knew, with a certainty that froze his blood to ice, that the final harvest was yet to come, and it was his own soul that was next on the cosmic entity's menu. He had been a healer, a protector of souls. Now he was merely sustenance. The sanctuary, once a bastion of healing light, convulsed. The air shimmered, thick with the concentrated anguish of hundreds of harvested souls, coalescing around Elias like a suffocating shroud. Kael, no longer a mere shadow, but a towering, indistinct form woven from the swirling, tormented mist of those souls, loomed before him. His obsidian eyes, now twin abysses reflecting the spectral agony of his victims, fixed on Elias with an ancient, predatory hunger. The pressure, both physical and spiritual, intensified, a cosmic vice clamping down on Elias's very essence. "You understand now?" Kael's voice echoed, not from his spectral form, but from within Elias's own mind, a chilling whisper that resonated in his bones. It was the collective voice of every soul he had touched, distorted, corrupted, and weaponized. "The dissolution I spoke of, it is my true nature. I consume, I integrate, and you, soul healer, were the perfect conduit. Your connection, your empathy, your very gift. It was the key to this grand harvest." The dark power within Elias, the tendril that had latched onto his spiritual core, pulsed violently. It was no longer a separate entity. It was an extension of Kael, a parasitic vine that had rooted deep, intertwining with his own life force. He felt his soul being stretched, thinned, his individuality dissolving into the collective consciousness of the trapped. He saw Elias's hollow eyes, the old man's silent scream, the weeping children, all part of Kael, all part of him. The horror was absolute. A desperate, primal scream tore through Elias's mind, unspoken, unheard. He would not yield. Not now, not ever. He was Elias, the soul healer, not a tool for a cosmic predator. He clenched his fists, the familiar tingle of his healing energy, now corrupted, flaring in his palms. He focused, not on the dark power, but on the faint, flickering ember of his true self, the pure, unadulterated light that had once guided his hands. He would fight. He would fight for every soul he had inadvertently condemned, for his own fractured essence. He projected his will outwards, a desperate surge of his original healing energy, attempting to sever the parasitic connection, to purify the dark tendril within him. It was like trying to extinguish a raging inferno with a single drop of water. The spectral Kael recoiled slightly, a flicker of something akin to surprise in his abyssal eyes. The collective scream of the souls amplified, a discordant symphony of agony and fury, as if Kael was using their suffering as a shield, a weapon. Futile, Kael's voice boomed, now layered with the desperate wails of the trapped. You are part of the harvest. You are mine. The dark power within Elias surged in retaliation. A violent tsunami of corrupted energy didn't just push back, it tore. Elias gasped, a searing pain erupting in his chest as if his heart was being ripped from his body. He felt strands of his own soul being violently unraveled, absorbed into the swirling vortex that formed Kael. His vision blurred, the sanctuary twisting and distorting around him, its ancient walls groaning as if in agony. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his hands pressed against his chest, trying to staunch the invisible bleeding of his spirit. He looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of agony and defiance. The spectral Kael was growing, solidifying, feeding on his resistance. The swirling mist of souls began to spiral faster, tighter, drawing Elias in. He felt the cold touch of countless unseen hands, pulling him, dragging him towards the looming entity. He tried to resist, to push back with what little pure energy remained, but it was like fighting against a black hole. The sheer weight of Kael's ancient power, amplified by the essence of hundreds of souls, was utterly overwhelming. You sought to mend, Kael whispered, his voice now a sibilant hiss that slithered into Elias's very core. But I am the ultimate mender. I mend the broken pieces of myself with the essences of others. You are but the final, most potent ingredient. Elias felt a tendril of dark energy, colder than anything he had ever known, snake around his neck, tightening, choking the light from him. It wasn't physical, it was spiritual, a noose made of pure void. He struggled, his mind screaming, fighting against the inevitable. He saw flashes of his life, moments of profound healing, the joy on a patient's face, the solace he had brought. All of it now seemed like a cruel joke, a path laid out for his own damnation. The very fabric of reality around him began to tear. The sanctuary dissolved, the ancient tapestries and flickering lamps melting into an abyss of swirling shadow and distorted light. The ground beneath him vanished, and he fell, plummeting into an infinite void. Around him, the souls he had harvested screamed, not just their individual agonies, but a collective shriek of cosmic horror, their forms stretching, blurring, becoming one with the encroaching darkness. Kael's form, immense and terrifying, filled his dying vision, his obsidian eyes burning into Elias's soul, a triumphant, malevolent grin stretching across his indistinct features. Elias tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The dark tendril tightened, pulling his essence apart. He felt the pure ember of his soul, the last bastion of his individuality, being extinguished. The light faded, replaced by a cold, crushing emptiness. He was no longer Elias. He was a fragment, a whisper, a single note in Kael's horrifying symphony of absorbed consciousness. When he finally ceased to be, or rather, when his individual consciousness was shattered beyond repair, he found himself adrift, not in darkness, but in an endless, shifting landscape of perpetual twilight. Before him stretched an infinite expanse of broken, shimmering shards of light, the remnants of souls, each a fractured mirror reflecting a sliver of their past pain, their unresolved fears, their endless despair. He was one of them, a single, agonizing spark amidst a galaxy of shattered selves. He could feel them, a chorus of silent, individual torments, echoing through the desolate expanse. Each fragment was aware, eternally aware, of its own incompleteness, its own separation, its own unending suffering. There was no warmth, no peace, no oblivion, only the ceaseless awareness of what was lost, of what had been stolen. He saw faint, translucent images of his past patients, their faces twisted in eternal agony, their eyes empty, their essence diluted to a mere echo. Alara, the old man, the weeping children, they were all there, trapped alongside him, their torment a constant, agonizing hum that resonated through his own shattered being. Kael was gone, having retreated into the depths of this dimension, leaving his harvest to stew in their perpetual despair, a cosmic larder of suffering. Elias, the soul healer, was now a soul in torment, forever bound within the very tapestry of suffering he had inadvertently created. His sanctuary was gone, his life a forgotten dream. All that remained was the endless, cold awareness of his defeat and the horrifying truth. He was not a healer, but a prison warden, and now he was just another inmate in the torturous dimension of lost souls, forever adrift in the silence of their collective, unending despair.